This presentation is delivered by the Stanford Center for Professional Development.
Hi, welcome to cs106b Programming Abstractions. Maybe now our mic is on. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. The website actually was probably the most important thing to take away from here, right, is where can you find information about the class. We're going to talk today and give some overview and stuff like that, but this is kind of the home base for all the material. So if you manage to get the handouts on the way in, you're golden. Otherwise, you can grab them from the website. There's a lot of just background information, staff information, office hours, all sorts of stuff there gathered. So it's kind of one-stop shopping for figuring out things about our course. Let me tell you what I'm going to do today. The first day, right, I know a lot of you are shopping, trying to check out, figuring out what's the right fit for you. So hopefully today I'm going to try to give you some information that will help you make a good decision. Want to tell you a little bit about what our course is about, tell you a little bit about the administration and logistics. Most of that stuff's pretty ordinary and you can read about it. Then, of course, I have to do a little bit of marketing. I get to give you my unbiased opinions of why this is the absolute best class you could possibly take. I get paid per student, you know. No, that's not true. And maybe we'll even have time to check out a little bit of the C++ language before we're done and said today. And need to go away. All right, so let me tell you about CS106. CS106 is the introductory programming sequence here at Stanford, right? So it's our version of CS1, where you start at the beginning when you are interested in learning more about programming. We have a two-quarter sequence, A and B, that kind of follow together. They're not particularly tightly coupled, which is to say if you took A and you took a little break, you can come back to B, or maybe you actually took a variant of a 106A type course at a similar, at another institution. You're probably in fine place for kind of starting midstream. We also have an alternate form of B, the CS106X, which is kind of an honors version of that second course. So after you've taken that first course and you're feeling really jazzed up, there is an alternative, sort of more intense way to get through the second course that's offered. It's offered this quarter, in fact, so if you're actually thinking about that, that is an option for you as well as sticking with us. What do we do in our 106A? A's official title is Programming Methodology. It is starting at the very beginning, and assuming you have no background in programming, is teaching you how it works, right? What the languages look like, what the syntax is like, what things you need to know about how to solve problems using a computer. So it covers a lot of the fundamentals about logic, control flow, and in general, I think of the big issues for 106A having less to do with any particular syntax or feature that you learn about a language, but about how do you solve problems on a computer? How does it, somebody gives you a specification of you need to write a program that does X, and you have to figure out how to make that happen, how to break it down, how to step through it, how to develop it, how to test it, how to iterate on it, how to make changes in it later, how to debug it when it's not working well. And those things, I think, transcend any particular language. We happen to use the Java programming language in our 106A course because it's a great tool for introductory programming, but I don't think of that as being really critical. So in fact, if your introductory course was in some other language, some other fairly modern high-level language, you know, let's say you learned in Python, you've learned in C, you've learned in Scheme or something other than Java, you're probably still fine, because what we're really counting on in B is that you know how to program, you know how to think like a computer scientist and kind of solve problems, but not a lot of the details of the syntax are going to be important to us. B picks up from there saying, okay, you've got some fundamentals. Let's start really learning some of the techniques that extend the range of problems you can solve. We look at recursion, which is one of the sort of fundamental problem-solving techniques, right, that involves using something akin to mathematical induction to solve problems in terms of themselves. Looking at a lot of algorithms for sorting and searching and hashing and doing things efficiently, right, knowing how to compare and contrast alternatives in algorithms, having some formalisms by which to discuss those things, and learn some of the just classics that are out there for solving these problems. The dynamic data structures, which involves the use of pointers to construct things like lists, trees, and heaps, graphs that model certain structures that are very effective in solving different kinds of problems. We'll work through those. And then a large part of our time is spent on this concept of data abstraction, which is why abstraction shows up kind of as the main word in our title, is how do we, as we start to solve more and more complex problems, right, the code itself can kind of become overwhelming if we don't have some technique for managing that complexity. And one of the big themes for 106B is how we can use this idea of abstraction, building something and dealing with this low-level details, but then closing up the box and now treating it as a kind of fixed entity and building on top of that, and then perhaps closing another layer around that as a way of kind of working on something and then finishing it and moving on to some larger piece without kind of having those details be clouding our way. It's a very powerful technique for solving large larger problems. And in that context, we'll be looking at some of the classic data structures like stacks, queues, lists, maps, and sets as part of the domain for that. We do happen to use the C++ programming language, but this is not a C++ course. So to be clear about what you're getting versus what you wanted, that we use Java here as a vehicle, we use C++ here as a vehicle. We happen to think there are good reasons to actually expose you to both languages. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But in particular, C++ is an enormous language. It has a lot of language features as well as a very, very large standard library. And our goal is not at all to turn you into like this industrial strength, knows every detail about quirks and ins and out of C++. There's another class, 193D, that does attempt to do that. And if that's what you're looking for, I suggest you take a look at that. But what we're here about is learning advanced programming techniques, taking those foundations and building on them to be able to solve more interesting problems. We happen to use C++. You will learn some C++, but I almost consider it a side effect of what we're doing. So just to be clear on that. So just a little note on placement. If you're kind of in between and not really sure, these are the very, very rough guidelines, but that they give you some idea of which groups sort of gravitate toward where. Right? If you are new to programming or you're not confident about your background, maybe it was kind of a long time ago, maybe it was self-taught, maybe it was in a course that you felt was not as good as it could have been, or you didn't do as well in it. 106A is a great place to start. Right? It actually is by all accounts an extremely popular course at Stanford, right, and services a wide group of people with a little bit of background or some no background, all very well, getting them up to speed. If you do have something like a solid first course experience, so you did well in our 106A or took a similar course or perhaps even self-taught your way through a lot of those materials, right, and you feel ready to move on, 106B. So an AP course in high school, the A curriculum is a pretty good match for the 106A here, so you're in great place. If you have this and you got a little bit more going for you, you're just super enthused, you have a lot of extra time this quarter, you want to sit in the company of only the uber geeks, you can check out 106X, which is the variant of B that covers the same kind of topical ground, but at sort of a different level of intensity. So it kind of amps up a little bit of the assignments, covers some material that we won't get a chance to cover, and just pushes the envelope a little bit there. If you actually have experience comparable to the first two courses, right, so you've done all of the things that we're talking about here in B and you feel comfortable with it, it might be that the right place for you is 107, which is the third course in our sequence, and just skipping over our 106 courses entirely. That's somewhat rare, so if you're thinking about that, I encourage you to talk to me a little bit to make sure that you won't be missing out on something important in doing so, but certainly there are students who have, for example, the APCS AB curriculum is pretty comparable to this course here, and so depending on how high quality the course you had was, it might very well be that 107 is right. In some situations where that course was maybe a little bit lacking, there may be some ways that we can help just reinforce the things you've learned and just kind of build a stronger foundation to move forward from rather than kind of jumping ahead. So any questions about kind of placement, general sense about that sort of thing? Am I talking too fast? Good. I like that. You can sit in the front whenever you want. All right. So then let's talk philosophy. Because I think, there's this statement about what we officially are, but I also think that the 106 has a very long tradition at Stanford that comes back from actually student motivation, which is interesting. I was here as an undergrad actually in the 80s when the 106s were just getting off the ground. And at the time, Stanford only had a graduate computer science department. And the kind of belief in the kind of nascent period for computer science was, well, that you should get a math degree and only then would you be mature enough to learn about computers. That somehow that there was, you weren't ready as a freshman. And there was just a groundswell of Stanford students who were like, we want access to programming, we want it, that kind of made it happen. And so part of the 106s was a really careful thought, though, about what the 106s would be at Stanford and what we want them to be in a kind of philosophical sense. And one is that we welcome all students of all majors and backgrounds. We don't have a version of 106 that's for the majors or potential majors and a version that's for the non-majors and a version that's for, terminal for you just want to get out of here. We really think that we can bring you all together and design a course that actually addresses kind of this wide disparate group, but still service that well. Partly because, you don't know that you're a CS major yet. I'm going to turn you into one. That's my plan. That at Stanford, right, not having to make that choice about a major until into the junior year. is a gift, right? To allow you to explore and to feel unencumbered by having made some decision when you applied. And I think it's important to kind of respect that gift that Stanford gave you by trying to make sure our courses don't funnel you one way or the other before you figured it out. So you are all welcome here. We try to make it accessible to everyone, and we have certain plans that I think help to make that work, right? We do try to provide a solid practical foundation in programming. That given our placement at Stanford in the middle of Silicon Valley, there's kind of a strong influence for us to try to produce students who actually kind of from the get-go are learning things that are actually quite useful outside of the classroom, rather than kind of teach you a very academic and perhaps very interesting and mathematical language like scheme, but that is very rarely used outside of the classroom, trying to teach you on the tools and languages and techniques that are actually in active practice. So we are using Java and C++, two of the most prevalent languages out in the industry. And we do a lot of learn by doing, right? We assign challenging full-fledged programs, right, that you work on and you build, and so it is not designed to be academic exercises, that you really are building skills that have applicability here and outside of the class. We have a big emphasis on truth and beauty. That this is one area in which some of the substitute courses that we have seen students come in with have a little bit more trouble with is tackling this part of it, which is that there are a lot of ways you can get a program to work. And many of them are not pretty. You can just type and type and type monkeys, Shakespeare or whatnot, and eventually you can kind of get your way to something that kind of works. Keep changing stuff. Well, +1, -1. Oh, what if I move it here? What if I copy and paste this there? What if I change that name? That in the end might produce a program that from external appearances works. It plays hangman or whatever was the desired goal, but that internally is a mess. It's not well structured. It's not well commented. It's not easy to understand. It wouldn't be easy to modify. It makes a lot of decisions that are really suboptimal. And we're really interested in producing engineers that have a good sense of design and that really appreciate what is involved in writing good software, well-designed software, not just working software. So we will be giving you feedback on both kind of the correctness, functionality of your code, but in as important, if not more so, also on how well we think you did at designing and implementing and writing code that is of a high quality. So we make a big deal out of that. That is something that is not always shared by other classes, and so in particular, someone who is self-taught or in a class that didn't emphasize this might feel that there's a little bit of a gap there where we need to kind of make that up with you, and we can work with you, because in fact this is a very individual thing, because there's not one good example of the perfect style that in the way that a lot of different people express themselves in written communication very well, but differently. The same thing is true about programs, right? You will have your own unique style, and we'll work with you to kind of coach you on getting your style to come through and be beautiful and elegant. This kind of comes back to almost point one as well, is that we make heavy use of undergraduate section leaders as mentors in this program. So we have a staff of 50 or so undergraduates who work with the 106 A, B, and X courses as a team. And they have specific responsibilities with their section. So mentoring and grading and meeting with the sectionees to give individualized feedback on their programs and stuff, as well as just answering questions, solving problems, being in the lair 30+ hours. So we're there most weekday nights, about 6 hours, and often well past the midnight when it's supposed to cut off, just solving people's problems, helping you when you get a little stuck, answering your questions, and making sure that you're kind of all making forward progress. And that comes back to point one, that in some universities, I think, where they're choosing to use their intro course as kind of a weeder. It's like, well, let's separate the wheat from the chaff early, and let's make it really hard and not provide too much support, and that way we'll make sure we get the people we want. And we really have a different idea that programming is hard, especially when you're learning. There's a lot of complexity to master, and there are a lot of details that can interfere with kind of moving forward, and we don't want you to get stuck on something that we can very easily resolve for you. So trying to make sure you have accessible staff members in person, in email, regularly in section, to help get through your roadblocks and keep you moving forward. What do you need to know to be sure you're going to do well? There are people who think that, to be a good computer programmer, you need to be good at math. You need to be good at logic. You need to be good at drinking Jolt. I think actually it comes down to more